Hello, my name is Dr. Luke Bell. I'm lecturer in molecular horticulture at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. This is a screencast of material originally made available for the module Principles of Horticulture and Crop Production from the years 2020 to 2025. Please note that some of the details may now be outdated.
So by the end of the screencast, you should be able to describe and explain different ways in which horticultural crops can be cultivated vegetatively, give reasons why some crops are propagated in this way rather than from seed, understand the advantages of vegetative propagation, but also understand some of the disadvantages and risks involved with this form of cultivation. So vegetative crop production of horticultural crops has been exploited by humans for many thousands of years. And most plants are able to regenerate themselves from cuttings or parts of plant tissue in some form or another. However, for cultivation and horticultural practices, this isn't really practical for many species, but for a lot, it's the only viable means of cultivating the plants quickly and efficiently. So one of the best examples of vegetative propagation is the tuber. So commercial potato production is dominated by production from what's termed seed tubers. So these aren't actually seeds. These are the actual potatoes themselves, which are used as a means of propagating the next crop and the next generation of plants. And they're essentially clones of the original parent plant and the original parent variety. And so they can be propagated in this way almost indefinitely from one crop to the next. Potatoes can produce seeds, but the nature of their genome makes this quite difficult, and it makes breeding potatoes quite difficult as well. So most potatoes that we eat are what are called tetraploid, so they have 4 copies of their genome inside their cells. So humans are diploid, so we only have 2 copies of our genome. But potatoes are tetraploid, so this makes their genetics very complicated, and it's much simpler to propagate them from seeds. Unfortunately, this method of propagation means that seed potatoes can often carry diseases from one season to the next, and from one field or one country and one location to another. So therefore, the cultivation sites for seed potatoes themselves must be selected carefully in order to avoid any contamination and transmission of diseases between fields. So generally, seed tubers are cultivated in northern latitudes, so places like Scotland, where the winters are typically very cold. So this makes pests and pathogens unlikely to survive the cold winter temperatures. And they also are suitable or more suited for areas with long daylight hours in the summer, which can facilitate their growth and development. So other crops such as tree species like apples and pears, things like that, they're propagated in an entirely different way. So one common means of propagating trees, for example, is by making cuttings. So new stems, woody stems, can be cut from a tree and can be encouraged to root into soil, and this will form a completely separate and independent plant. So as with potatoes, this form of propagation means that the new plant is a clone of the original. Commercially, new orchards and new productions can be established through a process known as grafting. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, as it's not really my area of expertise. It will be covered by others in future screencasts, but just to give a very brief overview. So what's done is stems are often grafted onto what are called rootstocks. So this rootstock will be of a semi-mature tree, and scions, which are the stem cuttings, can be grafted by introducing them into a cleft in the rootstock. These two are then bound together, and the tree will then go on to grow. So it's a kind of chimera of two different trees kind of stuck together, and plants and trees are much more amenable to this kind of treatment than animals, for example. So they're capable of grafting onto one another and functioning quite happily. So this slide here is just to show a mature tree, which is showing evidence of that graft there. So you can see the V-shaped graft in the mature tree. And so one of the advantages of doing this is that the rootstock will give growth characteristics and growth habits to the stem which has been grafted onto it. And one of the most common types or means of doing this is to produce trees which have an extreme dwarfing or dwarfing type. And this is kind of to facilitate more effective harvesting, as the plants of the trees are much closer to the ground and can be accessed more efficiently. And this union between the scion and the rootstock also has advantages in developing new orchards which have resistance to certain diseases. So the rootstocks, for example, can pass on resistances to the grafted scions. Other species can be propagated from leaf cuttings, and most crops can be encouraged to root. If you cut a leaf off of it, of a particular plant, it can be, and stick it in some soil, it can be encouraged to root into that soil and grow and form an independent plant. However, some crops have to be cultivated this way entirely, and one example is mint. Virtually all commercial productions of mint are done vegetatively, and this is because mint has lost the ability to produce viable seeds. So it will flower, but the seeds generally are non-viable and won't grow into mature plants. So the only means of propagating it between cultivation cycles is to set some aside each year as cuttings, which will then go on to grow into next year's crop of mint. And as I mentioned in one of the previous screencasts, another example where root cuttings can be taken in order to propagate a plant vegetatively. One example is horseradish. So again, this species has lost the ability to produce viable seeds, even though it does flower. But for commercial productions and commercial purposes, it has to be divided. The roots have to be divided and cut to produce the following season's plants to grow. And then finally, a slightly even more artificial means of propagating plants is through tissue culture. So this isn't done for many crops commercially, but there is one where it is done almost exclusively, and that is banana crops. So this is done in order to ensure that crops are uniform and disease-free, and so their plants are grown and the cuttings are made in a sterile laboratory, and so then they're grown in agar in little jars, and these will then go on to be planted out into a field of banana, and this is what that kind of planting out looks like. So the banana crop is then put out into a field, and virtually all cultivars of bananas that we eat, you'll pick up in the supermarket, are clonally propagated in this way, and have probably originated from a laboratory. So the Cavendish types of banana are the most common, and they're all clones of each other. This makes maintaining their quality and uniformity much easier, and it also speeds up the life cycle quite substantially of the banana tree. And the Cavendish, if you've ever eaten a banana, you'll know that they don't have seeds in. So for that very reason, the plants are incapable of their own reproduction. So they have to be reproduced vegetatively and artificially. The big downside of cultivating crops this way is, again, their vulnerability to certain diseases. So if a new disease comes along and the plant doesn't have any resistance to it, it could potentially wipe out every single banana plant because they're all clones of each other, so they have no means of developing new resistances. So, and there are examples throughout history where the types of banana which have been most common and commonly consumed have changed because previous types have been wiped out by disease. So new cultivars have had to be found to replace them. So in summary, horticultural crops can be propagated using a variety of different vegetative methods. Some species this is economically more advantageous than propagating through seed. For some species it's a requirement as they've lost the ability to reproduce sexually. Vegetative propagation can be much more efficient and can produce products of a more consistent quality, as every plant is essentially a clone and genetically identical to the others. Clonal varieties are vulnerable to pests and diseases and disease transmission, and they cannot develop new resistances.